I'm Claudia Besser. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Education. I'm pleased to introduce tonight's Hammer Forum on the role of private contractors in the ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, with Thomas X. Ames and Robert Young Pelton, and moderated by Ian Masters. The Hammer Forum is a series of public discussions about current social and political issues, and it's made possible with the very generous support of Andy and Bronya Galef. Ian is a BBC-trained broadcast journalist who's covered national security affairs for over 25 years on public radio. He's the host of Background Briefing, which can be heard Sundays from 11 a.m., and now the Daily Briefing, new, Mondays through Thursdays at 5 p.m. Both are on KPFK 90.7 FM. Ian has been a senior fellow at UCLA's Center for Strategic and International Affairs and the UCLA Center for International Relations, and he was a consultant to the Center for National Security Studies at Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. Please join me in welcoming Ian Masters.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank all of you for coming tonight. Since our last forum on consumerism with the Reverend Billy, the spirit still moves me. So, dearly beloved, let me begin with chapter 6, verse 24 of the Gospel of St. Matthew. No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. In the context of tonight's discussion, this raises the basic question at the heart of a pervasive trend that is capturing the United States government and corrupting the public trust while violating the public interest. How does a contractor serve both their corporate master and the public they supposedly work for? The privatization of national security is the most obvious example of this trend. But converting public service into private gain has been going on since the Eisenhower days, albeit in a modest way, until it was greatly accelerated under President Clinton with the 1998 Federal Activities Inventory Reform Act, FAIR. Then, under George W. Bush, it exploded with competitive sourcing, which has metastasized into a fire sale of government services now compelled to the auction block to assess any potential commercial function unless they claim their activities are inherently governmental. Approximately 60% of all government work today, from agriculture to welfare, is outsourced to contractors, and this has led to what the political scientist and anthropologist Janine Waddell has described in her new bestseller, Shadow Elite, as an emerging global threat to democracy, government, and the free market from a new class of power brokers embedded into the machinery of government with direct access to the treasury, little transparency, and even less accountability. Her research began in Poland and the former Soviet Union as crumbling state functions were cherry-picked by shadowy figures from the Soviet elite who became overnight billionaires. Today, Russia is run by KGB Incorporated, a toxic brew of oligarchs with privatized state assets, regulated by Putin and his shadow elite who enabled the plunder. Now, does this sound a little like Eric Prince and Blackwater writ large? Are we regressing back to the future? Indeed, are we still a democracy, or have we become a reality TV democracy? Participants in an American Idol political game show faithfully fed to us by the mainstream media. Meanwhile, our oligarchs, the Wall Street plutocrats, laugh all the way to the bank as the middle class is downsized and the American dream languishes while we fill potholes in Kabul, but not on Main Street, USA. But should we be surprised? After all, the gatekeepers of our democracy, our representatives in Congress, have perfected the revolving door that greases the skids of this process. It is not just acceptable, but commonplace for senators and congressmen to cash in their years of public service for private gain as they muster out into the private sector to become lobbyists for the same special interests they previously had oversight over on their committees. If you combine that with George W. Bush's cynical use of the Dracula in charge of the blood bank approach to government, where political appointees hostile to the very notion of government were inserted into the highest levels of the government bureaucracy with the expressed mission of eviscerating them and turning their functions over to the free market. Then the process is accelerated and the picture becomes clearer. A case in point related to tonight's discussion is what happened at Walter Reed Hospital a few years ago when the Washington Post, when it was the Washington Post, revealed the appalling conditions that wounded vets from Iraq were subjected to. It turned out that these vets had previously been cared for by trained government employees who were let go as their functions were privatized by a politically connected crony company that was nothing more than a shingle with a lofty name, a virtual shell that sucked up the same amount of taxpayer money but cut costs by hiring non-union unskilled labor while awarding executive bonuses, then shamelessly shortcut the vets, the last people they apparently cared for. We will begin tonight's discussion with Robert Young Pelton, who will speak for about 15 minutes, followed by Colonel Tx Ames. And then the three of us will have a discussion on stage before extensive Q&A from you, the audience. Let me begin with Robert Young Pelton, and we'll play a little clip of a National Geographic documentary that Robert made on contractors before he speaks. But I'll introduce him now, and then we'll go straight from the clip to Robert's presentation. Robert Young Pelton has survived a lifetime of unique experiences through 2 decades of research, travel, and work in over 30 conflict zones in over 120 countries. He has authored the best-selling guide to conflict and safety, The World's Most Dangerous Places. And his book, License to Kill, Hired Guns in the War on Terror, is described as a look into the even darker side of the War on Terror, the mercenary military contractors who make up the coalition of the billing. Robert Pelton has had first-hand perspective on the war on terror from direct contact with the world's most infamous jihadi rebel and insurgent groups, from Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the LURD, the BRA, the SPLA, the RUF, the Chechen and Georgian Mafia, PKK, MILF, RPP, FARC, AUC, to warlords, South African mercenaries, Somali pirates, dictators, drug lords, Northern Alliance, and many more, as well as being in combat with the U.S. Special Forces, U.S. and U.K. and anti-piracy contractors, and, of course, Blackwater, now G. Is that right? Z or G? Well, you can tell me later. He has been advising the top U.S. command in Afghanistan since August of 2008 and just returned from Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Young Pelton.
That was a 1-hour documentary I did for National Geographic on what contractors actually do in Iraq, and I spent quite a bit of time on the ground with a number of groups, among them Blackwater. I spent a month in 2004 doing the run on what they call RPG Alley, or the Route Irish, between the Green Zone and the airport, and that in itself shortened my life about 30 years. But I like to be an immersive journalist, so as you heard from the alphabet list that Ian read out, I never had a college education, so I figured I would just go there and ask stupid questions, and that's how I form most of my books. The book I wrote on contractors, and specifically security contractors, called License to Kill. It's a very inflammatory title, but it actually ties in to some of the unique exceptions that security contractors have had since the War on Terror. Just briefly, I was mostly with rebel groups and insurgent groups, and I had the privilege and sort of coincidence of being in combat with a special forces team that fought on horseback in 2001. And I got to know 12 very interesting Americans and a number of very crazy Afghans. And I went back to Afghanistan in 2002 to follow up on the hunt for bin Laden. I used to live down the street in Jalalabad from bin Laden, which is not much, you don't want to say that on your resume or when you go through security, but in 1996 he came to Afghanistan, not to meet the Taliban, but to hang out in Jalalabad. And I was intrigued by how they were hunting down bin Laden, because that's one of my specialties, is finding people. And then when I knock on their door, they go, "Who the hell are you and why are you here?" And I say, "Well, I want to write a book about you." So I was intrigued, and I bumped into a remote fire base that was being built on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I took a taxi out there, and I sort of strolled up to the base, and the Afghans assumed that I was with the agency or some, three-letter group, NSA or whatever. And I was there for about 3 or 4 hours, and a group of helicopters landed, and a number of senior people got off, American officers, and Special Forces team rolled up to meet them. And I began to talk to these people, and they started telling me what they were doing. And they said, "Well, you want to meet the contractors?" So I went over to meet the contractors. Now, at that time, 2002, I didn't really know what a contractor was. That was a guy who had butt crack that had to fix your bathroom usually. But I bumped into a guy who knew me through my books. I read a guidebook to war zones called The World's Most Dangerous Places. And he was a good old boy from Mississippi, and he said, "We're kind of surprised that you're here." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because most people get blown up on that road. How did you get here?" And I said, "Well, I took a taxi." Well, how did you find us? I said, "I asked the taxi driver where the secret American base was." But more importantly, I wanted to figure out, are you guys looking for bin Laden, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, "Well, I can't tell you, and you're about to get kicked off the base by my superiors, but, I've got to go back to town to Host, and maybe I'll come with you." So we shared a ride back to Host, in which he started telling me about what contractors did for the CIA. And I was fascinated, because I didn't know how much of this was BS and how much of this was actually going on. And keep in mind, I'd been with Special Forces teams, so I had a CIA team with them, so I kind of knew what Secret Squirrels did and what Special Operations people did. And I then started contacting my friends in the military, these 12 guys, and they started, I think 3 of them were working as contractors, and I thought, wow, this is really odd. So I then began a journey around the world. Now, I'll make it short, but essentially what I started was, okay, what is a contractor? Why do they do what they do? Where do they come from? So I immersed myself in their world. And I was lucky enough that Eric Prince was a fan of my books. And I do a lot of world firsts with terrorists and rebel group leaders. And Eric said, "Yes, I'll talk to you, and I'll go on the record in your book, and I'll give you all the access you want to my company." Now, I'm not Jeremy Scahill, because I shave, but I don't write a book about something until I've actually been there and experienced and had a sense of who these people are and what they do and their purpose in the world. And of course, in my books, you'll find good and bad people. At that time, I had no reason to judge Eric Prince or Blackwater, and I was privy to a lot of things. I mean, I was in at the birth of Greystone. I had tons of PowerPoint presentations about his future mercenary army and how they were going to create secret bases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it was, in his mind, it was all in the war effort. It was there to protect Americans, to allow our government to function safely, and to, more importantly, bring this huge, massive expertise into the military environment. So I've never been in the military, and Colonel Ames will tell you his tale of woe and his viewpoint and his experience. But I was brought into this through Blackwater. I saw what they did, and I was appalled. I was called the bullet bitch, and my job was to wear all the armor with the bullets, so if I got killed, they could grab bullets off my body. I did not carry a gun, but we used to use machine guns like car horns. And you got to remember, 2004, there was a lot of attacks on convoys, on U.S. personnel, and we ran that ridiculous route, that 10-minute thrill ride between the airport and the green zone, and there was always a car bomb, at least 1 or 2 or 3 per day. There were about 64 attacks per week on that road. We were always shot at by a sniper who was in a tower on the way out. We were always the target of drivers who drove very aggressively. I was not blown up, but the team I was with was blown up shortly after I left the country, killing 1 person and injuring a number of others. But the point is, it was probably the worst place to be at the worst time, and I got to see from the inside. And then I also spent a lot of time with Iraqi insurgents and Iraqi civilians, and I got to see it from the other side. And that is really where I started to dig deeply into the morality of this idea of a American citizen or a Ugandan or anybody who's been hired by a company, given a gun, and allowed to shoot you because you didn't move out of the way fast enough. And this, to me, as an American and as someone who is trying to look at it from both sides, is where I really sort of came down on the negative side. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about security contractors. There are smiling Filipinos that make meals. There's smiling Ugandans that check for bombs. There's smiling El Salvadorians who guard, toilets. The world of contractors is such that right now in Afghanistan, we have about a 1-to-1 ratio. Let's say 100,000 troops, there's 100,000 contractors. It's far more likely that a contractor will have brown skin and be from a third world country than Bubba from Georgia. But in the area of classified operations, I'm talking about the CIA and the DOD and special operations, there is a huge infrastructure of contractors that make $1,200 a day because they have double clearances. They use interpreters who are, in this case, Afghan Americans, who make $960 a day. They hire superstar coin experts like David Kilcullen at $3,000 a day, and they're currently sucking up your tax dollars fighting a war in Afghanistan. Now, I don't need to tell you what the average soldier makes, but most of them at the lowest level qualify for food stamps, and if they have an accidental discharge or they do something wrong, they get punished. Contractors, it used to be innocent or guilty or aisle seat or window seat. So it's a culture of impunity that is allowed to foster because we need them. And they're working within another country, so if we make them subject to the laws of that country, they won't carry guns and they won't do their job. So in short, I went through an entire arc, which starting with the agency back in the dirty wars with a guy named Billy Waugh, who was the oldest CIA contractor at age 74, whose favorite answer to any question is kill them all the way through to con men like Jack Adema, who pretended to be contractors and ran private jails in Afghanistan, through the training programs, through Iraq, Afghanistan, and even through the South African mercenary organization, in which a number of South African security contractors took a vacation to go overthrow Equatorial Guinea, telling their boss they were going to go buffalo hunting and ending up in jail. So the point is that it is a phenomena. It is has a timeline. It has a growth and a trajectory that not many civilians understand. And what I implore people to do is don't focus on the mercenary label, because that makes you think that these are guys in black outfits that'll kick in your door and shoot you. No, these are ex-servicemen from a variety of countries, but they are slowly becoming part of our foreign policy. It is far easier for us to put foreign troops in the guise of contractors on the ground in places like Yemen and Somalia than U.S. troops. So I would advise people to ask questions when you read stories, when you see documentaries, when you hear people talking about mercenaries or contractors, because 9 times out of 10, that guy is a guy that just needs the job and he's doing a very mundane job. And I see no problem with it. I don't see why a warfighter needs to clean toilets or flip pancakes in the morning. At the same time, there is a very robust growth of both clandestine, and I could be using the term wrong, but essentially people who you don't know about, and also sort of forward-leaning use of contractors, meaning hiring other people to do our dirty work, writing them a check, and if they screw up, we go, who are those people and why do they do that? When in actual fact, they're working directly for the State Department. In closing, I'll just mention, for example, the most famous event was Nisor Square, in which there was a shooting by a number of Blackwater employees. Blackwater had a contract to guard the State Department, usually a group of very timid people who they close the embassy if somebody sneezes. But instead, we decided we were going to have a forward-leaning policy, sending our diplomats and our agency people out to fight the war, and they needed protection. So Eric Prince put together a number of SEAL principles for protection in high-risk areas, and they rolled with a lot of spank, as they called it, which means a whole pile of guns and helicopters and guys with bad haircuts, to allow these people just to go to mundane meetings. Well, that was all based on Tier 1 personnel, which are very talented, very experienced, the best of the best. Those people quickly realize that you're going to die doing that job, not heroically, but just getting blown up. So they migrated to Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4, where now you're more likely to see a Marine, a young kid freshly out of the military, tasked with dealing with an extraordinarily complex problem. In this case, it was doing a blocking motion in a busy traffic square and suddenly saying, what do I do? What do I do? Well, they were Marines, and so what do Marines do? They shoot. Now, you can comment on that. But the point is, they didn't know what to do, and they made a bad call, and they killed a number of people. So instead of the State Department being chastised for having these people in that place at that time, because don't forget, they work directly for them, and the shoot calls and the movement calls are all made by State Department DSS employees, Department of Security. They decided to kick Blackwater under the bus. And then Eric got very upset. You remember him in front of Congress testifying what a proud American he was? Well, he's not anymore. He's very angry because not only did they kick him under the bus, they kicked his companies under the bus. So Eric was that disposable thing that I was talking about earlier. Who was that guy and why was he doing that? Shame on him. We're not going to do that anymore. The dirty secret is even though he lost the contract, they simply hired the exact same people in place. It's called hire in place. So the same process goes on, the same use of force by young people who should be Tier 1 people, and the same very aggressive projection of American presence in war zones continues. So anyways, I will end there, and I'll be happy to answer the questions after our dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. In his 30 years in the Marine Corps, Colonel Tx Ames served at all levels, commanding a rifle company, weapons company, intelligence company, infantry battalion, and the Chemical Biological Incident Response Forces. Ames' last tour of active duty was as Senior Military Fellow at the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. He served in Somalia and Iraq and trained insurgents in various locations. That doesn't sound right, does it?
Yeah, back in the 80s, the insurgents were the good guys.
Oh. How silly of me. An expert on fourth-generation warfare, Ames graduated from the Canadian National Defence College. He also spent 1 year on a research fellowship with the Mershon Centre for Strategic Studies. Dr. Ames has a Master's of Historical Research with a doctorate of Philosophy in Modern History from Oxford University and has lectured widely at U.S. and international staff and war colleges. He's the author of The Sling and the Stone on War in the 21st Century. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Colonel Tx Ames.
Well, I'd like to thank the Hammer Museum for the opportunity to speak here. It's going to be a little tough to have a debate because, first, Robert's a tough act to follow. Second, although we've come at it from very, very different personal experiences, our outlooks on contractors are fairly similar. The first thing, so what I set out to do in a few minutes is to discuss good, the bad, and then the fundamental question about contractors. First, I have to give a disclaimer. I currently work at the Institute for National Strategic Studies, but nothing I say reflects the views of the Department of Defense, the National Defense University, or pretty much anybody I work with. They're not that happy I'm off campus. First, you got to start with the reality. The United States forces cannot operate today without contractors. Robert mentioned there are 100,000 contractors in Afghanistan. That doesn't even begin to count the Pakistani and Afghan truckers that are moving supplies from the port of Karachi into Afghanistan. So quite simply, we cannot operate without contractors. Now, some locations, the only option for the United States is contractors. If you want to fight in Afghanistan, you have to use the passes. You don't use those passes without the permission of the trucking mafia and the tribes that control those passes. And you only do that by contracting through them. The third thing is sometimes they're the only force that will come when there's a problem. Executive Outcomes, of course, helped in Sierra Leone with, this was a rebel group that was famously cutting off arms of people who resisted it. They would do a double amputation. And no Western government, no African government would go help. Well, Executive Outcomes was a contract outfit out of South Africa, and they went and helped. They secured the situation and then were ejected for public opinion reasons. Similarly, in Darfur today, logistics moves only because armed contractors are protecting it. That's reality. Okay, so what's the good? Ian gave us a very brief history, just so you don't think this is a recent development. It's a very long-term relationship in the United States, and frankly exploded, as you said, under the Clinton administration, and then way out of control, I think, under the Bush administration. The good point about contractors is very, very rapid mobilization. They have the appropriate skill sets. When you get into a place like Iraq and you found out you've planned badly and you are not in position to deal with the number of threats, they went out to contractors and they brought thousands of armed guys in quickly. They have continuity. In some jobs, that's very important. For instance, if you're running the training base in Kuwait that is preparing the people to move into Afghanistan or into Iraq, you'd like to have some continuity. Well, the U.S. forces have personnel policies that would have people there only 6 months to a year. So about the time he gets good at his job, he goes home. Contractors will pay bonuses so people stay for 2, 3, 4 years. This is not a combat zone. It's very routine training or very routine maintenance, so it's an almost ideal fix. They pump money into the local economy. As Robert mentioned, most of the contractors are brown-skinned people. Now, we'll get to why that's a problem in the bad part, too. But if they're hired locally, it takes some of the people out of the insurgency because they're busy working for you. Now, the bad. Really, the very worst thing is we have no quality control at all. Congress has done big hearings. We've done a lot of examination of how do we get control over the contractors. We've got better educated contracting officers. But in fact, you don't know who they hired. I was in a place in Iraq where we were having trouble with people trying to blow us up. So they hired contractors to protect us. Well, they promised us Gurkhas, world-famous soldiers. What we got was Nepalese villagers. Now, you not only have no quality control, you have no control over their activities. Now, that's fine when they're serving a mess hall. You can sort that out, although sometimes there's huge disputes and it's a problem. But it's not fine when it's tactical actions. The incident in the square is one. It happened all over Iraq. It happens all over Afghanistan. As Robert mentioned, when you're on the other side, I rarely traveled with U.S. convoys because I was working to build the Iraqi army. I traveled with an Iraqi civilian in an Iraqi pickup truck. And the contractors saw us as a threat and treated us as a threat. It was fairly illuminating to be on the other side of that problem. We are responsible for every single action. Now keep in mind that in counterinsurgency, it's fundamentally a competition for legitimacy of governance. So we have put people in country that we have no quality control over and no tactical control over, and we have given them the sanction of the United States to take lives in our name with our authority, with no chance of punishment. So pretty nasty position. Now costs. This is interesting because the contractors always come out and say, well, we don't cost much because although we cost more per day, you don't have to pay for us forever. First, there's a couple problems with that. The Congressional Research Service has tried to look into this and can't find evidence either way. They're higher cost short term. They may be lower long term unless you consider that all these guys were trained by the U.S. government for 20 years. They've gotten out or drawing a U.S. government pension. And oh, by the way, if they're hurt badly, the Veterans Administration has to pay for the care. If they are not retired U.S. military, then they will have an insurance contract which is paid for by the taxpayer. And if they still get hurt and the insurance is not enough, then they're probably going to end up on welfare in the United States. The savings comes with the brown people you hire. If they get killed or hurt, you ship them back home and nobody mentions it. Okay, the impact on the local population is intense in this in a bad way because there's no recourse. When they do something like that, when they intimidate you, there's no recourse. My Iraqis complained about that, and when I rode with them, the same problem. Yes, as a full colonel in the Marine Corps, I could go back and say, these guys threatened me, and they'd say, who were they? And I'd say, well, they were guys in a white pickup, and they had dark sunglasses, and they wore khaki and had all kinds of black gear. Well, that's very useful. You've narrowed it down to about 1 of 25,000 guys. So if you can't get it, imagine how frustrated an Iraqi civilian feels. There's also a huge competition for qualified personnel, both among contractors and with the U.S. government. So that brings us to the question, what has the debate to date been about? Well, first off, for purposes of this conversation, but later if you want to have questions, we're not really talking about the support contractors, the guy in non-combat zones, the guys who do maintenance in Kuwait or the guys who do maintenance here in the United States. They use all the good aspects of contracting: speed, continuity, skills, duration, all those sorts of things. So the focus of the debate is on armed contractors and unarmed contractors operating in combat zones. Congress has focused heavily on eliminating corruption because that's been a big story. They focused on getting better results through contracting. They focused on improving congressional oversight and getting control of their actions in theater. By the way, we have not succeeded in any of those categories in my mind. But the real question, which we haven't answered, should we even be using these people in combat? The first consideration is the ease of mobilization. As mentioned, low political cost. If you mobilize 1,000 contractors and you kill 1,000 contractors, as we did in Iraq, or at least that's what we think the count is, because you know what, we don't keep track. It's Department of Labor statistics for work accidents is how these guys are kept track of. So we don't know how many we've killed. And I don't think they're reporting the Filipinos and the El Salvadorians who are killed on the job site. So we don't know, but it's very low cost. Now this should concern us a great deal. Our founding fathers created a government, and it's a government designed by geniuses specifically not to work. You've got to really work at it to make anything happen in this government. And one of the most important things was going to war, and that's why responsibility rests with the Senate. The idea of using contractors, which President Clinton used very successfully, was nobody wanted to go to war in the Balkans. Nobody would support it, but nobody cared if we sent contractors. And so we did. And that became a pattern. There's no outcry, there's no funerals, and there's no press coverage when these guys get killed or brought home. And primarily it strikes at the legitimacy of the government, both our government and the host nation government, because clearly here is an operating armed force without government control. Yet the Treaty of Westphalia, which set up the Western state, in effect says the state has a monopoly on force, but not these guys. They're outside state control. Very often they're poorly trained, and very often local politicians and companies can form their own armed contractors. We say no militias. So I don't form a militia, I form an armed contracting outfit. Well, why are you forming an armed contracting outfit? Well, you want me to truck supplies to your position, you have armed contractors, I have to have armed contractors. How can I object to that? And yet we've introduced another factor into the battlefield. So the key considerations that I would worry about, and then I'll wrap it up, is one, our founding fathers had no intention of making it easy to go to war. It's the most serious national security decision we make. We should not be doing things that make it easier. And they realized that only the friction between interests will prevent that. Our founding fathers did not think, we weren't Pollyanna people, that everybody's just going to work together and we'll all love each other. The government is based on a separation of powers specifically because the way to limit power is to give somebody else power to fight that guy. You'll fight for your interests, I'll fight for my interests, and pretty much we'll keep it under control. We're getting past that. The legitimacy of the United States is called into question, obviously, in forums like this. Ian obviously has some pretty strong opinions on what's happening here. And then the potential for problems. We have not yet explored this. We got rid of contractors, again, through the Treaty of Westphalia because of all the bad things it caused in that period. They're coming back again. The powerful are going to use armed contractors to maintain the status quo without any responsibility to their citizenry. We're seeing that in third world nations. There are no international mechanisms. If China had wanted to send 2 divisions or 30,000 troops to Sudan, we probably would have objected and had a discussion in the United Nations, correct? Well, they sent 30,000 troops to Sudan. They just called them contractors. And then they just make additional players on the battlefield. And they also change the concern nations as well as people have. An example here in Southern California. You have large numbers of armed contractors here in Southern California. You just call them gated communities. The citizen of a gated community is less interested in providing additional tax money for police services because he's already paid for his. So that applies an international thing too. Where would I conclude from that? We have got to wean ourselves off armed contractors. It's going to be very difficult, but we're going to have to do it. They should be used only outside combat zones, contractors. They can be used as contractors in the United States. They can contract all around the world. In non-combat situations, they provide excellent trainers and they provide excellent maintainers. Inside a combat zone, I would only use them in a counterinsurgency and then only for base maintenance things. The people who hand out the equipment, the people who cook the food, the people who maintain some of the vehicles, those sorts of things. Other than that, I would not be using them in a situation. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, Colonel Ames, just in the following on from the founding fathers, making war difficult, I think they also surely intended that because we talked of citizens, militias, etc. There was the idea that the people have their skin in the game. I mean, you mentioned Clinton trying to get us into an unpopular war in Bosnia for what he considered to be humanitarian reasons against a resurgence of 1930s style European fascism. Bush, in many ways, getting us into this antiseptic war that you know, we essentially lied into that one. We've never seen dead Americans. Al Jazeera shows it around the clock, but our military doesn't, our media doesn't. We don't see dead Iraqis. We didn't pay for it. It was all done through supplementals. It's almost a sort of immaculate war. And then on top of that, you have the contractors. And this leads me to what I'm mostly concerned about, is the idea that since we don't have a draft, where's the pushback in terms of the people? Because the only people who are making any sacrifices are the U.S. military and their families. The rest of us this is an abstraction to us.
Well, the pushback design in the Constitution is, of course, the Senate. And frankly, I knew we were going to war in Iraq when October of 2002, Senator Daschle made the decision to delay the debate on Iraq until after the midterm elections. Well, he was certainly aware that by the time you reseat the new Congress in January 20th and get back to business by early February, the forces would have flowed too far and it would have required a massive back down. So it was a failure of courage on the part of the U.S. Senate to assume its role. And again, this is a piece that's missing. Part of that courage comes from the constituents saying, hey, wait a minute, you're not sending my kids to war. And this has been one of the great concerns about the separation of the armed forces is there are very few sons or daughters of senators and congressmen that are in the fight.
But people, because it's a volunteer army, they don't feel the connection, for example, that we did during the Vietnam days. I mean, do you think there's a difference there?
Very few of the sons and daughters of senators went in Vietnam either.
That's true.
There were ways around it. I think the problem is this gets to between wars of choice and wars of necessity. In a war of necessity, there tends to be a mobilization and you really go for it. Afghanistan originally was a war of necessity, and the country was behind it and willing to sacrifice, and people were signing up. Even out of the Ivy Leagues, we were getting a lot of contracts. A war of choice was more an Iraq war. People just aren't that anxious for wars of choice. You can choose to go or not. The government, the nation could choose to go. There's not vital interest here.
Right. Well, that's what's scary, though, that you can hire these guys off the shelf to have your war, and you know it's completely antiseptic, and it's being done in our name, and we have no oversight. You know, I mean, could we get to a position where essentially you have 100% mercenary war?
I don't think the United States will necessarily get to that position, but I think that other nations are looking at that. Certainly with executive outcomes in Sierra Leone, the government simply had no army it could rely on, so they contracted the executive outcomes, and they solved the problem for them. Now, that was a legitimate case that time. The next time in Equatorial Africa, the attempt was to hire an army to do something that was not legitimate. It was almost back to the days of the wild geese.
Well, yeah, I think you're confusing two things. First of all, contractors don't fight wars per se. In other words, a guy that's hired to guard a convoy is not fighting a war, but he's part of the war effort. So yes, he does get engaged in back and forth violence. Proxy wars have been fought. When we went against the Soviets in Afghanistan, we used proxy armies. Central America, we've created out of whole cloth, armies to fight wars for us. The Eastern Alliance in the last war in Afghanistan was completely fabricated to pretend like there was a war going on down there. Those people are contractors. Those people we hired, the agency hired those people, are contractors. They have a contract. They're called campaigns. Where I started my book was with the CIA, because there is a crystal clear understanding of what contractors are for in the old school CIA. So you had a guy like Colonel Ames, who had a distinguished career, and I'm saying, hey, I'm working in Libya. And they're like, what? You're working in Libya? Yeah, I'm training up Gaddafi's bodyguard, as in the case of Billy Waugh. Well, you're going to go to Libya dressed just like that, and if you get busted, it's like, oh, I don't know who that guy is, put him in jail. And so there began this idea that you use contractors to do things you didn't want people to find out about. And when September 11th happened, they pushed a button at the agency and they go, oh, wait a second, everybody that was running the war back in the day is retiring or not on the payroll. So they had to beef up instantly with contractors, guys that then became what they call green badgers, paramilitaries, case officers, whatever. The problem is it's getting easier to use contractors than it is to recruit and train patriotic, sort of hard-working soldiers. And I think that's where you're going, is that we have a very tiny army, even though it sounds like we have 1.4 million or something like that. We've run out of soldiers. We burned them out. We can't get enough to fight our wars. So that's where we have this sort of long tail and this sort of force multiplier of contractors. And that's where our foreign policy is starting to slide sideways.
But in the intelligence world, how would you be able to prevent? I mean, if they get involved in collection and analysis, and they're peripherally involved in operations, right?
No. For example, you want to go fight a war in Yemen. Well, you need a lot of Arabic-speaking experts very quickly. And we're fighting a war in a Dari nation in Afghanistan. You can't just have a whole bunch of people sitting around and speak every language. So you're going to beef that up with contractors. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that...
Well, I'm just thinking about the proprietary nature of it. If a company has access to really important U.S. secrets, and presumably they bid on these contracts, they get them. What happens if, for example, you lose a contract? What happens to those secrets? And somebody else...
Well, first of all, there aren't that many secrets. You think there aren't really that many.
Well, they think they are.
Yeah, exactly. There has been very few problems with the classification structure of the U.S. military. Once you go for your classified or compartmentalized, whatever, you're very well scrutinized. If you want to sell your soul by selling whatever you know about missiles to the Russians or the Chinese, they're going to catch you. It's simple as that. What we're really talking about is emotion. We're talking about an intangible thing that a soldier brings to the military that a contractor does not bring to Blackwater or Triple Canopy. You hire me to do something in Iraq as a contractor, I look at you and say, I don't like working for you. I'm going to go work for him. And all of a sudden, it's like, well, wait a second. There's a war going on. You got a flag on your... I said, so what? He's paying me $600, you're paying me $400. So the point is that you get into this weird world where two security companies are driving down the road in opposite directions. Their main task is to protect the principal in that vehicle, and they will shoot at each other if they feel that other vehicle is a risk. And a soldier serving on the ground is looking at this going, those people are crazy. And yet each person thinks they're doing what they should be doing for the country. So that's where we're going with the discussion on contractors, is what is a contractor, what does he bring to the fight, what does he take away from the fight, and how does he really mess up a serving officer's control of his AO or his operating environment?
Well, I'd like to clarify two things. One on the secrets problem. As far as I know, we have not had a contractor betray us in a big way. Every time we've been betrayed, it's been by a career intelligence officer.
Right.
the counterintelligence officer of the CIA, the top guy, and the counterintelligence guy of the FBI, the top guy, were both being run. So I'm not worried about that, because most of these guys are cleared, there's a background check, there's repeated things, all the processes in place. I'm more concerned about the point there of multiple nodes of control in the same battle space. That's extraordinarily confusing when you're down at the tactical level, and it causes both hesitation and, again, even more important, the impact on the people that you're dealing with. The second thing, as far as using, I would disagree with you saying we hired contractors against the Russians. We didn't. The Afghans were going to fight whether we were there or not. The motivation is different. I see a contractor, someone hired from a third country. If we had hired a bunch of Yemenis or a bunch of Bangladeshi to come into Afghanistan to fight.
You're talking about Al-Qaeda, which were the original
Well,
contractor
perhaps you're
from
talking
hell.
about, but these are volunteers, and they're going to fight whether you're paid or not. The true professional contractor is more the executive outcome guy, who, if in fact somebody doesn't hire him, there's no way he's going. He's just not interested. It's not his fight. So that's one of the differences. I think there's a difference between supporting an indigenous movement and hiring in an outside movement to come in.
But as a Marine officer, I mean, what is the rank and how did the rank and file feel about these guys making these, you know, trigger pullers making $1,000 a day or whatever the hell they
It's about $450 now, but
well,
Yeah,
whatever.
frankly,
I mean,
that
and
came
the
down.
and the other issue, connected to that is, my understanding of what happened in Fallujah was that these Blackwater guys took a wrong turn looking for kitchen equipment, and they got strung up on the bridge, and there was a lot of outrage. But essentially, the Marines had to go in because the Bush administration felt they had to answer for the death of 4 contractors, and that resulted in the death of many, many Marines and countless Iraqis and the destruction of a city. So, is there any bitterness within the ranks about these guys?
I think the bitterness was more that, okay, they were told to go in, and they said, we've got a plan to do this. Don't force us to go in. But very, very senior levels, probably above the Secretary of Defense somewhere, said go. And they went. And they were about 80% through the job, and the Iraqi government told the U.S. government, if you keep going, we quit. So the U.S. government ordered them to quit, and they said, no, we're close. Buy us 48 hours, we'll finish this thing. And that's where the anger came, that they had got that close to the job and then were told to pull back. And then after being told to pull back, they got no guidance. I mean, the general, when he finally set up the brigade in the city there with the corrupt old Iraqi army generals, because nobody would tell him anything. Nobody would give him any support or any help. They just said, you can't go in, but you have to control the city.
I want to point out an interesting anomaly about that event. We're talking about when the 4 Blackwater contractors were strung up. That was a brand new contract. It was full of bozos. I was with that team, and they had a lot of internal friction and discussion on what they were supposed to do, who was in charge. You know, they stupidly outfitted themselves in the exact same vehicles that the CIA was using, these Mitsubishi Pajeros. They dressed identical to CIA paramilitaries. They had the sunglasses. They basically looked like they were up to no good, and in fact they were lost. And so they were brutally murdered. It was used as a propaganda thing. I think it did wrongfoot the military, who had a very careful plan to go in and control Fallujah. And that was the beginning of what I thought was the first visibility on contractors and Blackwater and why are they there and are they mercenaries, are they fighting wars. We never actually corrected our view of contractors, because then we got into the running people off the road and all sorts of weird things like shooting the bodyguard after a drunken party, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody's ever actually said, hey, let's blame the State Department, because essentially the WPPS contract and the existence of Blackwater was essentially a State Department mandated program. The one contract where they were strung up Fallujah was just a silly little catering contract they had that they were trying to do commercial business, which they screwed up royally. But the basic damage was done by protecting our diplomats in a very aggressive program of moving around the country.
So, I take it you feel, Colonel Ames, and I shouldn't be worried, or nobody in the audience should be worried, that for example, as we draw down in Iraq, that will be replaced by contractors, and if we draw down in Afghanistan, that would be replaced by contractors. They simply cannot be a substitute for national policy. And
I think one of the reasons the Iraqis and the Afghans won't accept them.
I see, because of their reputation as such.
Because they're contractors. I mean, it's one thing to have allied armies in. And again, this goes back to the Middle Ages, or late Middle Ages, when we finally got to the Treaty of Westphalia and began the forming of the nation states. This is about the name company comes from English free companies. When the war was over there and they said, okay, time to go home, we're through paying you, they said, boy, I don't want to be a farmer again. So they stayed companies, they just motivated themselves around Europe, living off the land.
Well, we do have I mean, does it go back to Christmas Day, many, many years ago when George Washington crossed the Delaware to fight the Hessians? Where does this revulsion come about?
Well, I personally, I don't have that revulsion. I've been with Executive Outcomes, and many of them are my friends. I stay with them when I go to Afghanistan. And I know the conditions of those countries before those people entered the area. Where I focus on is the anomaly. Let's talk about Hurricane Katrina. A lot of my friends were off duty, and Hurricane Katrina happened, and they were deputized as security in New Orleans. The problem was they were hired to guard wealthy people's homes, bars, restaurants. They weren't there to guard the people. And the funny thing is that the New Orleans police took that disaster as an opportunity to do some looting. And so my friends were in shootouts with the New Orleans police, guarding people's art collections, shooting at cops trying to break in and steal the art from the house. So you had a situation in which contractors on their days off became a private militia within this country and legally deputized. So to me, that's an interesting conundrum, because this bubble, this workforce, this egg that's going through the snake exists whether it's working or not. And as I mentioned about the Equatorial Guinea coup, and these people, I see them all over the place. I see them in Somalia, I see them in Afghanistan, I see them in Baghdad. They're the same people doing the same job, just shifting around the country. And the cool thing about the Equatorial Guinea coup is they self-finance their own army. So in other words, you take Blackwater and you say, well, what if Eric Prince just wrote a check and decided he wanted to own Madagascar? Well, he could. See, that's the point. So that's where this goes, is the economic incentive of using armed people for political gain or for financial gain is a return back to the sort of East India Company and sort of the old colonial predation of the globe. And I see that actually returning. If you go to Africa, you talk about the Chinese, they work hand in hand. They're basically military companies where they say, we need to build a mine, well, we need security. You know, it's like, well, then you're basically occupying that little piece of that country.
Well, I take it you thought my Cassandra-ish presentation was a little hyperbolic, shall we say. But explain this to me then. Why do people like Tim Geithner, Richard Pearl, Wolfowitz, Larry Summers, why do they keep showing up all the time? It seems, I'm beginning to wonder whether there's a kind of these other centers of power, you know, that operate sort of in tangent with the government. As you cut down the importance of government oversight and allow these contractors to become take more and more of the responsibilities, surely you're creating these other centers of power. I mean, I suppose the military-industrial complex will be the model that people are afraid of, and not the least of which was President
Eisenhower.
Eisenhower.
On something here, but again, you've got Bill Clinton showing up all the time, Al Gore's everywhere. All these sorts of things are happening. That's a byproduct of the way we're organized. Now, I agree with you that there are some things that make sense to contract out. For instance, I don't need unionized help mowing the lawn, probably. Probably can do that cheaper other ways. But there are essentially government functions that you do need. The people who handle Social Security checks, the people who do what would be core government functions. And that's the fundamental argument. What is a core government function? And now that's a very different discussion than the armed contractors discussion we came, and I think you probably need to host a night to discuss the domestic use of contracting in non-military functions. Mm-hmm. Now, one of your interesting points, we've got to be aware, and we're planning for this inside the military, the next time I go ashore to rescue Americans as a Marine, I may be fighting an armed contractor. Or I may get there after he's already there. Because this may shock you, but sometimes the U.S. government takes a while to make a decision. And the result is the oil companies that work the Gulf of Guinea don't think the U.S. government is coming if their platforms are taken down. They have contractors that you're both protecting and on retainer to rescue. So by the time we get the order, the Marines will be there. And every time I've done one of these things, you sit off the beach and you wait for days and days and days or weeks and weeks while they run up different scenarios and they debate it. And, you know, you could have gone in, done this whole thing and left, been home before they make a decision. Well, the contractor's going to do that. They'll go in, they'll make the hit, they'll get the platform back, they'll come back. The danger is if we get a fast decision and we're hitting the platform at the same time the contractors are, because here's a bunch of armed guys in boats at night, we don't know who the hell they are. And we could very well get in an intramural firefight with contractors. Yeah. Similarly, in places, when the Chinese send a large contract to Angola, 300,000 engineers, are they engineers or are they combat engineers? Are they all demobilized out of the Chinese army? So we have introduced, again, another element into the global, the international structure that we really don't have any rules for dealing with. If we're going to assume we have to have it, then we better develop the rules.
Historically, the answers lie in history, because the future of places like Africa is either going to be a functioning nation state with its own military that's well-trained, which will use contractors, or it'll be little pockets of secured assets protected by contractors.
It's like the movie Avatar, right?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that the U.S. military is not offering some of the easy, quick solutions that these countries need. So if you look at Somalia, where the government basically sits in a tiny little area, you know, surrounded by Islamic fundamentalists, there's no U.S. military there. But there will be contractors there, and there are contractors there. If you've got an oil well in the Sudan or some hostile area, it'll be ringed by contractors, and that'll supply money to the guy who's in charge, and there's no need for an army per se. So I think this is the easiest path, the path of least resistance, if the U.S. government doesn't say, you know, our national interests are being eroded by the ease which people can deploy contractors.
Right, but would these contractors also be the palace guard, protecting an unsavory?
Absolutely.
So that introduces a whole other element.
Well, this is the Praetorian Guard. I mean, that's the whole reason why you hire contractors. Like, the President of Equatorial Guinea is guarded by Moroccans, which is a gift from the King of Morocco, because A, they don't speak the language, and they're incorruptible, and they protect him from his own military. So it's...
Well, let's open up to questions from you, the audience. I'm sure you've lots of...
Is this lights a Hollywood thing? I mean, I've never been on a stage where you can't see the
I know.
it's that's better.
Well, I guess we're on stage. What can I say? We have microphones on both sides. This gentleman down in the front here. Wait for the mic. It'll come down.
Why do you feel that there isn't or can't be any quality control or accountability with the human contracting side, but like on the equipment contracting side, there is an element of quality control and accountability when you're buying equipment versus the human contracting?
Addressing it to anybody?
I can give a quick answer.
Okay.
There actually are quality controls. The military spends centuries creating standards for personnel and skill sets. Some contracts say we need tier 1 people, and these are specific people from specific units with specific training. Now, is that guy an alcoholic? Did he smash his car up and want to kill his wife? That doesn't enter into the equation. But the problem is you pay more for those people, and the market dictates quality. So those guys used to make $400 a day. They're now making $1,200, and the guys that used to do tier 1 jobs are getting $300 a day. So the market dictates price. And do you want 10 guys at $1,200 a day, or you want 10 guys from Nepal at $20 a day? You know, that's really the decision.
I would say the problem is actually pretty basic. In the U.S. contracting system as it currently exists, the contracting officer writes the contract. So he writes a contract to run the base that I'm responsible for in Iraq. I am not allowed to modify that contract because that changes the money value. So it makes good sense from a monetary point of view that only the contracting officer, who's got a good background in contracts, in law, and all those sorts of things. So I show up and I have a team that I tell them is a really well-trained infantry team. His background's in law. How the hell does he know if these guys are trained? We spend an enormous amount of effort trying to certify our guys as effective. Tier 1 has an ungodly amount of money compared to the rest of the forces. One of the primary problems as a commanding officer training is finding that your guys are qualified, and then it's even harder to judge if a unit is qualified, and the larger the unit, the more difficult it gets and the more scattered it is. To assume that a single contracting officer, oh, by the way, he's probably not in the country. When I had to deal with Saudi Arabian Trading Company, who was running one of my bases in Iraq, the contractor was in Tennessee. I could not tell Saudi Arabian Trading Company to change their procedures, even though they were given the Iraqi army dysentery, because I wasn't a contracting officer. And trying to get him hooked up with the Saudi Arabian Trading Company to change the quality of the food in the mess hall, which is a measurable quantity. Now try to do an unmeasurable quantity, like how alert are they at 2 o'clock in the morning? Do they have SOPs? Do they have procedures? Basic skills you can sort of test with a quick drill, but unit skills require you to actually go out in a training area, shoot, move, and communicate.
But it's
You don't
like
get
going
to
to
do that.
Walmart, because what I found is that they tap into a new market, and you get these wonderful guys, all eager, talented, and then the next rotation there's half as many, and then the third or fourth they're all kind of grumpy, useless guys. Then they go, hey, Ugandans, that's the flavor of the week, and you get these smiling, happy people, and then that slowly starts to fade away, and it's like, no, Zimbabweans.
Let's take somebody here on the, there's a gentleman down here on the left.
Hi, thank you guys. I'm going to call myself a pessimist or a realist here, and I'm going to say that it's going to be very difficult to legislate against the use of contractors, that the lures are too great. You've mentioned a lot of them, the ease with which they can be put into action, but also the market dictating that very skilled people will want to become contractors. So I'm wondering if you envision a way to approach this differently and to raise the lures in the Army, either with increased funding or increased size, in order to draw away the skill sets that are currently going to contractors.
You have to create a demand. So, for example, right now there's a move on, I think Bush started it, to do a volunteer kind of replacement for contractors. But really, you have to have a contract. In other words, you have to pay money for these contractors. The best way to legislate them is to either eliminate that contract, specify that contract, or shape it so that the people you're getting are exactly what you need. And that is an ongoing process. It's not like it's going to vanish. But the other interesting thing is, why don't we stop? You know, is it like crack cocaine where we just need to hire people all the time? We have to ask ourselves that when we commit ourselves to a conflict, are we writing checks we can't cash because we're sort of strip mining this military expertise that takes 20 years to create? And I think that's where we're going to hit a wall at some point.
Well, also the problem is, right now we're ass deep in alligators, and draining the swamp is not high on our list. We've got 100,000 contractors in Afghanistan. We don't have 100,000 troops to send to replace them. We got 140,000 still in Iraq. We don't have 140,000 troops to replace them. When we get past those two conflicts, and we'll come back, what do you think the attention of the American voter is going to be about the military and the need for preparedness? It's going to go close to zero as we begin to deal with the Social Security crisis, with the financial crisis, et cetera. So the demand signal for contractors will go away, they'll all go away, but also the demand for the military goes away, so the forces will be cut back in size and readiness. And then this will come up again, because as much as we're a great peace-loving nation, we'll find somebody we want to fight. Or somebody will find out they want to fight us, and we'll go do that. And we'll be right back where we are, where we've got a demand signal. The only way you beat that is to mobilize your reserves. And we have the forces to do it if we mobilize the nation. The problem is, do we have the political will? And that's a problem. If the population of the United States is not convinced the war is really worth doing, you will not have the political will to do it. And so we will have, political leaders will make a choice. President Clinton made the choice that it made more sense to try to cut off trouble in the Balkans rather than let the war really get going. President Bush made a similar decision in Iraq. And then the question is, can you sustain that? Because you never really had the people on board to start.
So you actually, you feel that we're going to end this war, or these two wars? I mean,
Eventually, they won't last forever.
right, but what about Yemen and Somalia? I mean, I get the impression that Al-Qaeda's strategy is to bleed us, because we're the gift that keeps on giving. We keep falling into bin Laden's playbook.
Well, we do hope that at some point adult leadership will appear on this whole terrorism problem, and you'll realize that this is a wicked problem that will not end. You have to manage it. And you will manage it in different ways, but invading other countries is not high on the list. We've now kind of tried that one. It didn't work out so well. So we'll try some other approaches. And this is, I mean, I kind of make a joke of it, but the nature of all wicked problems or interactively complex problems is you don't have a solution at the beginning. You think you've got a solution, you think you have the problem defined, and then you start the solution and you go, well, that wasn't quite it. So you have to redefine a problem and try again. And it's an interactive problem. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but when you think about it, if you've got a 12-year-old daughter and you have a plan that you think is going to get her to 18, I've got news for you. It'll be an interactive process over the next 6 years to get her there, and you're not really sure what the end product is going to be at this point. Most of the world is that problem.
I have a question for Colonel Ames. What do you think about the difference between log cap thinking and marine expeditionary thinking?
Well, explain log cap. For
Sorry, Dick Cheney came up with this great idea when he worked for Halliburton, which was, why does the military have to keep a huge standing capability for things like bases, fuel, whatever, when we can simply get a list of contractors who will provide it on demand? So if we want to go attack Canada, we can call up Halliburton and they'll have 5,000 trucks, 2 billion gallons of fuel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which would then reduce the inventory within the military and focus more on sort of a mobile, agile force that could fight 2 wars at once. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Whereas, and I've never been in the Marines, but I have great respect for them, so the Barbary Pirates and some of the older historical things, they launched expeditions, self-contained expeditions to go do something, almost like a punitive expedition, and returned home. And that was the mission set. Basically go there, do this, come back. It wasn't build a little HESCO fortress and sit there for 5 years.
Well, I think the difference between expeditionary and log cap is log cap assumes you've got some kind of a secure base to move into. Expeditionary assumes we're starting offshore and everybody onshore is trying to kill us. So you've got to fight your way ashore, and then even your logistics people have to be prepared to fight. Right. Log cap assumes there's a secure area. Now again, I'm not against log cap. When we maintain pre-positioned supplies in the Middle East, like a brigade set in Kuwait, it makes no sense to hire a soldier to check those vehicles every week and do the various maintenance checks and keep them ready. And when troops come through to train, to sign them out and check them back in. It makes a lot of sense to hire a contractor for that, because you don't pay them outrageous rates because they're just doing contract work in a reasonably modern part of the world and reasonably comfortable situation. So that makes sense.
Let's just take a question here in the gentleman in the front here. Just wait for the mics. We want to immortalize your comments.
Oh yeah, thanks for being here, all three of you. I am a firm believer in that statement that if they can get you to ask the wrong questions, it really doesn't matter what the answers are. And it seems to me that there are some operating premises that all of the discussion is based on, and I'd like to question that. I've been told, and I believe, that the definition of fascism is corporatism. And it seems to me that contractors and mercenaries throughout history have been tools of fascism. And can we open the discussion to looking at that these aren't wars for anything other than corporate agenda? Thank you. You very nicely parroted the Council on Foreign Relations party line, like their president does, that we have wars of aggression, wars of necessity and wars of choice, when can we look at the fact that they seem to be in actuality and in retrospect and hindsight and currently wars of agenda? And I'm wondering if we can really look at the whole premise on all this and really question whether or not we can. I mean, we have to call BS on the whole thing. We can't just go running around.
I think we got your question.
Yeah, that's the question, is can we open it up and really look at what we're actually doing around the world and why?
Okay. I think I'm officially on the left coast now. The problem with that statement is that you would have preferred we do nothing about Afghanistan. Interesting. Okay. Now, the problem is, it's a democracy, and after 9/11, wait a minute, I'm answering your question, sir. Please have the courtesy. I listened while you repeated yourself. You think the United States is not a democracy? It's a representative democracy.
Let's not go back to
Okay.
the 200 years. Let's just deal with it tonight. Come on. No. Come on. We're
Okay,
not,
I'll tell you what.
Please,
Enough,
please,
you're
just-
done.
Enough, okay.
Out of a courtesy, you're done. I'll try to answer the question. The people of the United States were unified behind the action to go to Afghanistan. We were not unified in a very significant majority. If you go back and look at the public opinion polls and the reactions, and not just Fox News, but across the spectrum, maybe not out here, but the bulk of the country, by very large percentages, were in favor of going there. What we didn't have was a plan for once we had punished them, there's much less certainty about why we should be there. Frankly, there's not a lot of corporate profit in Afghanistan. The return on the money invested by the major corporations is about average for corporate return, and fairly high risk too. As far as oil, there have been fantasies about Caspian oil for a long time, and they never seem to work out. The Iraq war clearly was a war of choice, and frankly makes no sense to me, and I don't think the American people supported it. The problem is, once we were in there and broke it, then the problem is, if we had left during a civil war and it had collapsed and then spread to the greater Middle East, whether you like it or not, the global economy runs on oil. You may not like it, but it's a fact. If you interrupt that in a very big way, you are dooming millions of people to starvation in very large numbers. If you understand the world economy and the role oil plays in the world economy, you understand that you have to maintain the flow of that oil. Now, when you do something stupid like start a war in the most vulnerable place in the world for oil, you have to do something to resolve it. We're moving in that direction, and hopefully we'll get out of there as fast as we can and leave some form of stability behind.
Question, this gentleman here, yes, there you go, on the left.
Thank you. I think, we know that there have been incentives for war since World War II. We got into the Cold War. We built up our military-industrial complex. There's no question we've gone to war for oil. But, we also have this incentive because we sell the military-industrial complex products. And, and now it seems that with contractors, we've created some other incentive for profit from war. And my concern is if you end the war, with the military, you have reserves that keep our country prepared to go forward. But after you create this system of contractors, and if they're not going to other countries to fight, what happens within the United States? We have people who have been ex-politicians like Giuliani. We have the governor of California talking about privatizing our prisons. How many of these people do you think would become a force within our domestic system and a new political system that is fed from our politicians and keep our economy driven through corporate greed?
I'm going to get that on record. It's a long question. I'll give you a short answer. Contractors are businesses. If there's no client, there's no profit, they don't exist. Now, your question is really saying, do they create an economic force for war? In other words, are these people constantly lobbying for more contractors being sent out to do more things in more countries? Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the major contractors, they're not actually the ones that you read about in the news, not the Blackwaters. The primes are all DynCorps, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, large, companies specifically set up to manage very large contracts for the government. They take their slice and then they sub whatever job it is they want underneath them, and they slice and they slice and they slice, and it creates a flow of money. Now, one interesting thing, when you read numbers about contractors in Iraq, I'm not talking about American contractors or Western contractors, they're making a lot more money working over there than they ever could back here. And if you sit on the plane going to Dubai from Atlanta or whatever, it's full of good old boys that fix generators and do all kinds of esoteric things that they couldn't even get hired in Walmart if they went back home. So there's kind of an economic bubble in all this. And it is a war economy. And it does generate more support for continuing the long war. And there is very much a fear factor built into, Al-Qaeda. Like, they're here, they're there, they're everywhere. I don't like it. I mean, I think that we try to put contractor profit band-aids on political and social problems instead of saying, if you don't like what's going on in Yemen, you send your son to go fight there. So I think that's where the disconnect is.
And we'll take some questions, but I just want to know about what prompted you, by the way, to I think that you were the first senior military officer to call for Rumsfeld's resignation. What prompted that?
Now, first, it's very important to understand I was not on active duty at the time. No, this is a very important constitutional issue. The military is under absolute civilian control in this country. A military officer should never be able to speak out in public about his civilian masters. The day that happens, you slam him into jail and you put him in a court-martial. There must be absolute civilian control. It's up to you guys to pick the right civilians. It's up to me to follow what they tell me to do. Once I retired, I was then free as an American citizen. So really what I was providing is, from an expert point of view, I thought he had completely misjudged the problem he had in both Afghanistan and Iraq. He refused to admit there was even an insurgency. In the Pentagon, you could not use the word insurgency. That lack of understanding of the nature of the problem meant he was totally incapable of solving the problem. And I thought, on that basis, he needed to go.
The gentleman just next to you there. There you go.
Oh, that was easy. Thank you, gentlemen. I'll ask a short question and hopefully get a long answer from all of you.
Not from me. I'm not on trial.
Basically this, regarding contractors and contracts. My understanding is that a lot of Dick Cheney's companies received no-bid contracts in Iraq as soon as we invaded. Halliburton, Carlyle Group, Bechtel, Kellogg Brown and Root. In the summer of '04, he said, quote, "The insurgency is in its last throes." It's now 2010, it's 8 years later, untold dead. Is this not an unwinnable guerrilla war of attrition? Thank you.
Okay, so much for short questions. I'm not sure which war you're talking about, Afghanistan or Iraq. All the things you're talking about is Iraq. In fact, we are on our way out of Iraq, and we'll be out of there by the end of the year. Now, whether that will continue as an Iraqi-on-Iraqi conflict, and there are a couple of different divisions, the Sunni Shia division or the Kurd Arab division, is very much a question. The very fact that there has been a peaceful transition of government in Iraq is a truly amazing development. Now, I'm not optimistic about Iraq. I think it could still go south. We will probably not be involved in a big way, and we need to try to get it right before we go out, because again, they're fighting on top of the world's oil supply, and I don't like it, and I wish we would start to move to exploit our own energy in this United States, and we would look at alternative energy, but for the foreseeable future, there is no chance that alternative energy is replacing oil. And if the world economy crashes because of no oil, then millions and millions, if not hundreds of millions of people will starve. So we're stuck with it. Afghanistan's a different problem. It's a very, very different war, and of course, I don't think Mr. Cheney had much to say about Afghanistan.
No, he's background noise to most of the people serving there. But the point about corporations, confusing two things here. Dick Cheney and George Bush were very amenable to corporate solutions to their problems, and they strayed into the era of warfare by saying, hey, my guys need something, you got a solution, give it to them. In other words, just because it takes 5, 10 years to develop it as a military or government solution doesn't mean we shouldn't hire the exact same people in a corporate environment. But the logic was that this was a short-term need, the term surge capability. It's now become a constant, ongoing part of military and intelligence activities. So much so that the CIA is mostly contractors over in Afghanistan. And contractors make a lot more money than government employees do. I think we're creating almost, you could look ahead in the crystal ball and say, well, we can solve a lot of problems in the world with a strictly contractor force. I don't mean mercenary like shooting guns, but I mean taking ex-military people and applying them in sort of diplomatic and business development, et cetera, et cetera. They're trying to fight that by creating this sort of volunteer thing, but nobody wants to work for minimum wage in Afghanistan when the guy next to him is making, $150,000 a year. So, yes, Dick Cheney is connected to the monetization of warfare. Did he directly benefit? I don't think so. He made his money long before he got in there. Is he an irritating fellow these days? Yes. But he is not a policy shaper anymore.
Hallelujah. Are there any women in this discussion? Yes, in the back there. Wait a sec, the mic's coming.
It sounds like the way things are heading and set up right now is that the U.S. is training the military, and then the incentive is them to leave as soon as possible and become hired by these contractors at higher wages. So in the long term, are we really saving money?
No, but we're removing political risk. For example, in Yemen, it makes a lot more sense not to use serving special forces officers, but to actually hire out to a dying corp who uses bubbas from Atlanta, from the local constabulary, to teach people what to do over there. Because if those guys all get blown up, it doesn't damage our political policy. So what we're doing is we're doing this sort of by proxy because it lowers political risk.
Let me ask a question. Before tonight, how many people knew how many contractors have been killed in Iraq? Not many. And actually, we don't know because those are Department of Labor statistics. We're not sure what the hell the count is.
The only way we know is if someone is insured by the DBA Act and they claim, but there's so many levels of contractors that we don't even know how many contractors involved. And remember, they kept revising their figures up when people say, how many contractors in Iraq? The problem is that it's easy to hire contractors and it's easy to hide contractors, and using supplemental funding was even better because you can buy out large chunks of your capability.
Yeah, well, that was my immaculate war concept.
It was close. It was close. It was.
But what's the figure then?
Of dead?
Dead?
There's about 1,100 now that have claims in Iraq. I think the number is much higher.
Much higher.
Because, again, the El Salvadorians that were killed there, the Bangladeshi drivers, none of these people were listed.
They're buried by the side of the road.
And the casualties, probably around 10,000 Americans have been hurt. Now, and then, of course, that comes back. Some of them, if they're retirees or in your VA program, if they're not, they're dumped on the streets of America, and we figure it out.
Future of using contractors in a domestic setting and the appropriateness of using contractors in a domestic setting?
It really centers around posse comitatus, which means that, let's say we use a hurricane as an excuse to create a paramilitary force to provide security. Your only safety valve is that they have to be seconded or deputized to law enforcement. That doesn't mean anybody's controlling them, and it doesn't mean that my ranch is being guarded by my guys and your ranch is being guarded by your guys and we don't get along. It is a huge, huge problem if you look at this. You look at the ads in the paper, they're always hiring potential people to do disaster relief stuff. Nobody's done anything bad yet, and these people tend to be from law enforcement and from the military, so they're not hillbillies on the back of pickup trucks. But it is something that people don't really want to touch because it does have all these sort of very dangerous legal arguments to it.
Any thoughts on that?
I think as long as you use the Guard under Title 32, they have law enforcement authority. so they can be used and use weapons. Regulars cannot. Under Title 10 as a regular, I was not allowed to carry weapons within the continental United States. I could do emergency relief. My unit helped clean up Capitol Hill. If there was a crisis in Capitol Hill, we would respond, but nobody carries weapons. That's a possibility. The problem is when the government fails, then Americans will turn to contractors. First you turn to your neighbors. If there aren't enough neighbors, the contractors are hired to come in. And again, while we're down on contractors, remember one of the reasons we went to this is because sometimes the government just doesn't do that well. Sometimes you're standing in a Department of Motor Vehicle line and wondering how this might be shorter if McDonald's were responsible for moving the line. So it's a healthy tension and a healthy trade-off to have an alternative source to the government, because giving a bureaucracy a monopoly is not generally the best method to get peak performance.
But you have accountability questions. I mean,
No, you don't really have
what I'm saying is that
with the
I'm
government, you
looking
got
at a cop,
accountability questions too.
I'm looking at a cop, he's got a badge number, and he
Yeah.
says, "Give me your wallet."
Oh, absolutely.
I'm looking at a contractor, his name is Bubba, and he's got sunglasses on.
I don't think it's a good idea to have these guys out there, but the fact is we're going to have them unless the government learns to respond. Now, one of the things that came out of Katrina is they modified some rules on how fast you get the National Guard there, because they realized there was a gap. These Bubbas showed up and they said, okay, we got to do better with the Guard next time. So sometimes having the government badly embarrassed is the only way you get results.
Yeah.
The question in the middle there, where's the mic? There we go. Yeah, just across there.
Thank you. Sorry, could we learn from any lessons from like the Russian defeat or the British defeat in Afghanistan and compare it with their world perception of their model? Do that reflect to our worldview toward Afghanistan today, some extent, and does that model can fail or pass?
Just a quick, I think it's a mistake to compare the Soviet occupation, the British expeditionary activity, and what we're doing in Afghanistan. But I can say that nobody wants to own Afghanistan. So the question is, how long do you bang your head against the wall before you go, you know, it feels better when I stop this. So Afghanistan is the third or fourth poorest country on earth. We can probably make it the third and a half most poorest country, but that's about it. And Afghans are very excited, very proud of what they have right now. But it's going to be their job to clean up their country. We can't be, global cop in a place like Afghanistan.
Any thoughts on because I know people are
The role of the strategist is to figure out from limited strategic resources, how do I get maximum results? If you look at Afghanistan, if we are very, very good and very, very lucky, in 10 years, we can have some kind of a functioning government, a functioning economy, maybe the drugs will be knocked down. Again, you got to stop, please. You've got to suspend belief and think you can do that. If all of that works out perfectly, the best you get is a poor version of Chad. So the question for the strategist
Mountainous version of Chad.
Is it worth $1 trillion and a couple thousand ISAF lives and God knows how many Afghan lives because the world needs another Chad? Because that's essentially where we're going.
Well, let's do the math. There's 25 million people in Afghanistan. We're about to spend $30 billion to send our sons and daughters over there. We could just write checks and go home.
all right. So make this the final question up here. There we go.
Thank you. I'd like to ask my question actually in regard to what you said, sir, on the lines at the DMV. You asked if, of course, McDonald's were running that. If I could ask, how effective are contractors? You mentioned they were efficient, they had other attributes, they can mobilize very quickly. But when they actually are on the ground, how effective are they? At the high end of the spectrum, we have this misconduct, this gross misconduct. So we're hiring them to run that line. Are they actually doing the job?
Where contractors can do well is in peacetime situations with repetitive tasks. So I stated I don't think they belong in a wartime situation. You want somebody to maintain your trucks in Kuwait? Great idea. They will give you superb results because you can quality control and follow up. You can start the trucks, you can see how well they operate, things like that. Putting them out on independent, essentially security patrols in Iraq or Afghanistan, I think is a disastrous idea. They can't do that.
Well, thank you both for coming. and to the left coast. And do come again on February the 2nd, is it, Claudia? I believe it is. We're going to be doing a panel on the endangered middle class. And it's a lot of the stuff that I was saying in the opening that that the Colonel loved so much. Okay, see you on February the 2nd.